Good morning, party people, and welcome to Office Hours, the webcast where I take your SQL Server and Azure SQL questions at the link below and then talk through the answers. Jim Van Allen says, good interruption to my Amazon shopping. I know, right? Same here. I was looking, we have to get a TV for the backyard. We have this big curved TV wall, and I was like waiting and waiting for Amazon Prime days to get here because it's pretty close to being finished. The backyard, the curved TV wall, pretty close to being finished, and so I was waiting as long as I possibly could. And my TV that I wanted wasn't on sale, so kind of is what it is. You have to choose when you put a TV outside. You basically either have to buy a really expensive TV that's designed for the outside, like $5,000-$10,000 for a TV that's weatherproof. And also the other thing that's cool with them is they're really, really bright. They're much brighter than typical TVs are so that they can handle the sun, direct sun or whatever. Or you buy an indoor TV and you just wrap it in an enclosure or put a bag over it whenever you're not using it. And so, of course, regular TVs are way cheaper. They're like $1,000 or $2,000, right? So I'm like, well, why don't I just do a regular one? And then if it breaks after a few years, I'll get an even better one because TV prices keep getting better. So we'll see how that goes. So I obviously went with the cheap route. And so for obvious reasons, it's saving money. Why would you not? Samuel Stick says, did you solve Paul White's quiz the other day? I don't think I saw it. I don't think I saw Paul White's quiz. Or if he did, I don't know where he posted it at. I don't use Twitter, so I'm not sure if he posted it on Twitter. I didn't see it. I don't think I saw anything on his blog, so I'm not sure what it is. He always says to check his Twitter. I don't use Twitter, so I'm not a fan of Elon Musk and the way he's treating minorities, especially folks who are transgender, for example. Not only the way that he treats them personally, but the way that Twitter as a platform brought back everyone who was abusive to trans people. That, of course, because my partner is trans or is non-binary is the more technically accurate term. I'm not about to make that guy any richer, given how abusive he's made that platform to pansexual and transsexual, transgendered type folks. So. All right, so and not to make anyone feel guilty, if you use Twitter, that's completely okay. I don't have any problem with it whatsoever. I did switch over to Threads recently. I tried Threads, and the problem is that's not really great for me either. I'm not really a big fan of that because right now it's filled with spam. Right now it's filled with all kinds of messages from people who I don't really care about. I don't watch Real Housewives of whatever county, and it feels like that my feed is just becoming this, all celebrity Kardashians kind of thing. I'm like, I don't care about any of those people. All right, so let's take a look at the first top voted question here. The top voted question comes from tanchenglai, who asks, hi Brent, I've implemented a system that records data in another factory. When changing shifts, the data cannot be inserted into the database. I suspect it's due to too many machines causing storage problems. How do I convince the hardware guys to upgrade the server storage? Is server storage cheap? Is it easy to change? So you're asking them to do something based on a hunch? I tell you what, most of the time when I run into problems, I try to get evidence to prove what the bottleneck is. That's what I think that you should do too. Rather than making a guess and then trying to get other people to spend all kinds of money and take big, long outages, why don't you go gather evidence? And the way that you gather evidence isn't to look at storage metrics, it's to look at SQL Server's wait stats, look at what it's waiting on. And I teach you how to do that in my Mastering Server Tuning class. Now, spoiler alert, most of the time when people think there's a whole lot of concurrency, like lots of inserts, updates, and deletes are happening at the same time, storage isn't the problem. The biggest problem is usually blocking. Because after all, when you do inserts, updates, and deletes, they have to make it to the transaction log quickly, but the data pages, they don't actually need to make it to disk anytime soon. SQL Server flushes those out to disk asynchronously long after your storage is completed. So it's fairly rare that storage is the cause for a whole lot of inserts performing slowly. It is possible you can run into write log waits. It's just extremely unusual. Another time when you have storage run into a problem with storage is when you have synchronous always-on availability groups and you're trying to commit, say, across multiple data centers. And in that case, the storage isn't the bottleneck either. It's the speed of light or whatever crappy pigeon network transfer you're using from one place to another. Next up, MooneyFlyer asks, "Hi Brent, do you have any recommendations on how to manage self-referencing tables? Say an org chart and queries like, does this employee have this manager in its hierarchy?" You nailed it with that word there, hierarchy. You want to try the SQL Server data type hierarchy ID. It's designed for this exact kind of thing, hierarchy ID. And you don't see a whole lot of people blogging about it because it's just kind of cut and dried. It's kind of like saying, how do I store numbers? Well, you use a number data type like decimal or whatever it is that you choose to use, big int or whatever. So hierarchy, there you go. Next up, Juan Falcon asks, "Hi, we're heavily invested in reporting services 2019. He says, "Should we be looking at other options or products for when we jump to SQL Server 2022? Microsoft hasn't officially deprecated reporting services, but if you want to count how much of an investment they've made in that product in the last 10 years, I bet you could go through your couch cushions and find more money than Microsoft has spent on reporting services in the last decade. They just haven't spent a lot. Whereas on the other hand, they're lighting money on fire with Power BI. They're throwing all kinds of resources at that. New features come out every single month. It's amazing. So I would absolutely read the writing on the wall there. I don't think that... Now, if reporting services is good enough for you, and if you're happy with it, and especially if you do on-premises, you could be fine. You can postpone that the spend of redoing your reports until as long as possible so that you only move when you feel a genuine pain. If you're feeling some kind of pain now, like if you're looking at Power BI and go, man, I wish my reports were that gorgeous, then yeah, it's probably time to start considering the migration. But otherwise, you don't have to move just because you're moving to SQL Server 2022. Next up, Beans asks, "I'm using the merge statement for update, insert, and delete from source to target with the selected date time in the target table. Is that the correct way to use merge?" Well, the correct way to use merge is not to use merge. I know this isn't an answer that you want to hear, but if you search for merge Aaron Bertrand, merge, and then it's Aaron Bertrand. If you search for merge Aaron Bertrand, there's going to be a post out there on MS SQL Tips that has a big long list of known issues with the merge command. It'll allow duplicate data in there that violates foreign key constraints. It'll tell you there are foreign key constraint violations when there aren't any. There are performance issues. There are deadlock issues closed as won't fix by design. Go through there, and it's not like Microsoft is fixing it. It's just bad. Michael J. Swartz says, partial list of features to avoid, merge. I would probably also add Java in the database would be another one that I would add in there. So sadly, I hate to be the bearer of bad news. And then when people hear that, they're like, wait a minute, what am I supposed to do? Write my own merge statements? Write my own inserts, updates, and deletes? Yes. I'm sorry. I wish I didn't have to give you that advice. I wish Microsoft was fixing the problems with that feature. They are not. So that's kind of the end of that story. Thanks to Data Geek MO. Shout out there to Data Geek MO for subscribing with Amazon Prime. If you have an Amazon Prime subscription, you get one free subscription to a Twitch channel every month. So you can go into, so hit subscribe, connect your Amazon Prime account, and then I get like $1. It's not far from that. I don't know what the exact amount is. Next up, Benbo says, DBAs believe indexes are a function of data. Devs believe that they're a function of schema. What are your thoughts? Yes? Indexes are part of a database's design. Sometimes they're managed by developers. Sometimes they're managed by database administrators. Indexes change over time as your code changes, the selectivity of the data changes, like the skew of the data from one way to one set of values to another. The way that the users use your application changes. Yes, all of those things are true. RoJo asks, we have 12 remote developers who use our development SQL Server database to develop on. Oh, I hate this. Oh, God. Is there a way to safely allow this on the internet without giving VPNs to every dev? Okay, so first off, here's the reason why I don't like this. If some developer is in the midst of a schema change, they can add a column, change a table, change a default constraint, any number of things that will suddenly break other people from being able to do their work. In a perfect world, I would like to have every developer developing against their own local copy of the database. It's relatively easy because SQL Server Developer Edition is carry the one free. And you can run it locally with very low amount of overhead. You can run it in a Docker container if that's your fetish. There are all kinds of things that you can do to run it locally with a very low amount of overhead. They don't need the entire production data set. They just need the tables in the stored procedures, views, etc. And they need the configuration table contents. So that's the way that I would route you to long term. Now, to answer your question, you said, is there a way to do this safely without giving VPNs on the internet to every dev? Sure, what you could do is you could put it in, say, for example, Azure SQL DB. You could put it in Azure SQL DB and just grant access to people based on their login. So that way, only the people with the login would be able to successfully connect. Now, that does mean exposing this to the internet. But if it's your development database and all people are doing is testing their code against it, it might not be that bad. As long as it doesn't have any real customer data inside of there, and as long as you're not worried about the logic getting out if someone somehow stumbles across a username password combination that works. I would much rather have you get started with using local databases. Ira asks, what criteria do you use if given a foreign key should have an index or not? My personal belief is that when you just get started developing an application, you should index every foreign key by default. However, as your application grows, you may hit points where those indexes aren't being used, and you may need to peel them back out in order to make performance room for other indexes that would be desperately needed. That's the short answer. If you want to hear the long answer, check out the foreign keys module in my mastering index tuning class, where I spend about half an hour talking about the pros and cons of foreign keys, why they don't usually work all that well in terms of performance, even when they're indexed, and what you should do instead. Next up, Statistically Uncertain asks, if there are any, what are some use cases? Holy smokes, somebody came in between him and his keyboard. It was like he was playing like every typo and grammar error known to man there. What are some use cases where automatic statistics creation should be disabled? When people ask questions like this, I always want to give an answer. I'm going to tell you that I have never in my career needed to do this. However, let's play pretend. What if there was a case where I did want to disable it? I'll give you an example. What if you have a database and it's only got one SQL server, like all production activity happens on just this one SQL server? You don't have a reporting server, you don't have analytics, you don't have a data warehouse, anything. Everybody just hits this one SQL server, and it's got to be fast. Let's say it fronts an e-commerce store for you. It hosts your website, for example. You got to have inserts, updates, and deletes happen as quickly as possible. You want stable execution plans. And people don't run reports often. But when they do run reports, they have some crazy queries that hit every single kind of column. And we don't really care about the performance of those reporting queries. I might not want SQL Server creating statistics on every column that the reporting queries are slicing and dicing on. Because all it takes is one query, and then SQL Server creates, or one query that hits a column that needs statistics that doesn't have statistics on it before, and SQL Server with just one query will suddenly add a new stat on that column. And then from that point forward, you're faced updating that statistic on a regular basis with your like update stats job. You don't know how useless that statistic is or how useful as it might be. And you're paying the debt on that for the rest of your life. In that weirdo use case, I can imagine dropping all of the statistics, then letting SQL Server create them for just the important insert, update, and delete queries, saying no reports for a few days, and then after a few days, turn off automatic stats creation, and those are going to be the stats that you roll with. Like I say, never had to do it in real life. I'm stretching to come up with an answer there, but that would be an example of where I would do it. Next up, Jiun asks, hi Brent, I've got a SQL Server procedure that my website will call. The procedure executes a JavaScript. My problem is that it's taking too long to execute, about 6 seconds. Wait a minute. Are you telling me that Java is not known for its high performance? Are you telling me that Java isn't known for its sub-second response times? My goodness. This is over half of the runtime is spent importing libraries and loading objects for the scripts to use. Well, Jiun, I don't see a question in there. I see a series of facts. And I would agree with you that yes, calling Java from SQL Server is probably a bad idea. Moving on. Azul says, what are the pros and cons of all developers sharing a single SQL Server instance versus hosting their own instance? Which do you recommend? Now, we kind of talked about this recently here, just a short version, but the pros and cons. The pros of having just one single SQL server is that as long as nobody's changing the schema, then it's really easy to do development without having to run your own local SQL Server database. You can also have a much beefier database. You could, if you want to, run a complete copy of production on there with all the same exact data sizes that you run over in prod. It's not necessarily a great idea, but what a lot of people do is they restore the production and database right over to the development environment, exposing all their customer info, personally identifiable info, all those kinds of things. That's the pros. The cons is if anybody makes a breaking change, you're kind of screwed. All development comes to a halt. Plus, I've seen cases where people said at release time, they're like, all right, whatever's in the development SQL Server, that's our new standard of truth. And they promote that up to production without even understanding what the changes are or whether or not they're even a good idea. If each developer develops locally, makes their changes, and then checks them into GitHub, or whatever your preferable version control system is, then it makes it a whole lot easier to build a change script where you go, I know that this change is tied to this pull request, which is tied to this issue. So you know exactly why the thing is being added. Then it also makes it easier that if someone's feature takes a really long time to implement, they're still developing on their own and they're not breaking anybody else's stuff. Next up, Nora asks a question. Oop, for some reason it didn't pop up there. Let me hit that one more time. Nora asks a question, when should a computed column be persisted? Oh, that's such a great question. Almost never. But there's one use case. Now, you didn't say indexed. Indexed is another subject altogether, and I talk about that in my Mastering Index Tuning class in the Computed Columns module. But when you talk about the keyword persisted, almost never, except for one use case, when the computation of building that value is very hard. It's computationally intensive, it takes a whole lot of work, and you read it frequently. Let's say, for example, that I'm just going to make something up on the fly, I have no idea. Let's say that you needed to compute a hash value across a whole bunch of really large columns, and you queried that all the time. Well, then you could persist it so that you could avoid the overhead of recomputing it every time you go to read it. That's extremely rare, though. Usually, most of the time, people are only reading it as they just get the rest of a select star and they're dumping the rows out to display, and the computation isn't even all that hard. Let's see here. Oh, we should stop for our sponsor here. I'm going to take a short sponsor break. Those of you who aren't subscribed to me will see an ad from Twitch. That is your penalty because it's going to happen at some point. I might as well trigger it at a specific point so I'm not answering a question. So those of you who aren't subscribed, there it is. Those of you who aren't subscribed will go see an ad, and those of you who are subscribed will get a reminder that I just launched today a brand new Fundamentals of Azure Networking for Data Professionals class. So Drew Fergewell is a good friend of mine who used to work for Microsoft, was a senior something or other customer solutions architect over at Microsoft, did all kinds of Azure work. And when he left Microsoft, we were talking about like, all right, what are things that you've learned that you wish you could go do a training class on? And he goes, oh, I could do one on Azure networking. And I'm like, that's a great idea because so many of us who do Azure all the time, and I don't count myself in that. Most of my clients are actually Amazon, which is why I don't teach that class. But Drew's capable of teaching it because he did all kinds of work with Azure, working for Microsoft, go figure. So he talks about DNS, subnets, virtual networks, getting VPNs to work, how managed networks with Azure Data Factory work, all kinds of good stuff. That class is free for the next 2 weeks. Every module is going to be on for a different day. So right after this live stream, you can go watch that over at brentozar.com/go/network. You can watch a free module every single day. So you can do that. And then the class is also on sale for half off during this month as well. Bob the Lobster, shout out for subscribing for Amazon Prime. Woo, thank you. All right, let's see. Next up, we have johnkurt asks, non-clustered indexes have pointers to the clustering index in a rowstore table. How does the connection work with column store indexes? So it's a really good question. It's funny. I've been thinking a lot about, do I do a mastering column store class to cover things like this with demos? I've got a fundamentals of column store class, and there hasn't been a big demand for mastering column store, but I think the time is about right to start working on that. So what I did was I worked with Joe Obish, who's another instructor in our community. Joe knows a ton about column store, and so I bought Joe's column store class, and I'm converting it into a mastering column store class where I'll talk about this exact kind of thing. That should probably drop within the next couple of months. It's probably not going to be August. It'll probably be September when that drops. Next up, Ronnie asks, what is your opinion of Power BI versus Tableau? I have no opinion whatsoever. I don't do reporting applications, front ends, whatever. But I do think that if you're a betting person, it does pay to bet on Microsoft stuff that is included with their enterprise subscriptions. If Microsoft gives something away almost for free, to enterprises, they make it really compelling. I'll give you an example, Microsoft Teams. Microsoft Teams is one of the worst applications I have ever had the displeasure of using. To call it a piece of poop would be an insult to poop. It is garbage, junk, nearly unusable. And you compare it with Slack. Slack is amazing. It's so smooth, it's easy to use, it's elegant. You can have multiple accounts signed in at the same time, all in the same console. There's just so many things about it that are fantastic. I would pay money not to use Microsoft Teams. And yet so many companies out there use Microsoft Teams. Why? Because the bean counters don't have to use it, and to them it's free. Power BI doesn't suck as bad as Teams does. Power BI is actually pretty awesome. And it's not free, but it's really cost effective compared to something like Tableau. And as long as your company just has an enterprise agreement and they just write one check and suddenly they're in with all the Microsoft ecosystem, I think it's really compelling. Next up, T asks, what is the best DR solution for SQL Server 2019 Standard Edition? I think the same Standard Edition DR has been I think my favorite DR option for SQL Server Standard Edition. It's been the same for probably 20 years now, and that's log shipping. I adore log shipping. It's so flexible, it's easy, it doesn't add overhead to the primary because you were going to do log backups anyway. It's just fantastic. And I would expect that to be true for years going forward. There you go. Dua says, what is your opinion of T-SQL merge to update target tables? My opinion on merge is that you want to go search for merge Aaron Bertrand and then read the list of limitations with it. I would advise against using the merge command. Dhurata asks, what's the best resource for modeling dimension and fact tables in SQL Server? So the approach with this for modeling those tables hasn't changed in probably 25 years. So you could go down to a bookstore. Remember bookstores? I don't know how old you are, Dhurata, but I remember bookstores. You could go down to any bookstore and get any data warehouse book, and you'd probably be okay. And they're all going to be on sale for like $2.99 because, let's face it, nobody buys books anymore. You could go to Amazon.com and get electronic copies of books, but really anything that you find out there about modeling dimension and fact tables is going to be fine, even regardless of SQL Server. It can be for any data warehouse or any relational database. Kimball and Inman are a couple of names that you're going to hear. B. Herman says over in chat, he says, I like the Kimball books. They probably have been updated in the last like 10 or 15 years. It doesn't matter. You could get a 20-year-old one and you'd be completely fine. DBA with MBA asks, have you run into issues with Nutanix? Oh, I'm going to get myself in trouble. I'm going to get myself in trouble. I have never had a happy customer on Nutanix. Now, I should clarify that. No one comes to me when they're happy. People come to me when they're frustrated about performance. But when they come to me and they're frustrated about performance and they have Nutanix, every single time, the root cause has been Nutanix. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news there. DKKimbo says, we keep getting query store going read-only after an internal file stream error message is logged. Have you seen file stream cleanup errors on systems that don't have it enabled? No, but also I'm not a heavy leaner on query store. I would open up a Microsoft support ticket. It's $500 and they work the problem with you until it's done. It's usually the fastest way to get resolution and fastest and most cost-effective way to get resolution on issues like this, because there very well could be a known issue that they just haven't pushed a fix for in the latest cumulative update, because I have seen bugs with Query Store getting fixed even as recently as like the last 2 or 3 months in cumulative updates, which is great. I love that Microsoft is continuing to push quality control on that stuff. That's great. I'm not saying Query Store is a buggy feature. I don't think it is. Not in the year 2023. I think it's pretty doggone stable, but that would be the route that I would go. Open a support case for $500. And then the last one we'll take today, Lucky12345 says, does the closed source nature of SQL Server make it less vulnerable to hacking attempts when compared to Postgres? I have no idea. So that's not going to be the last question that I take. Sorry, I have no idea on what makes things more or less vulnerable. Instead, I'll take Nathan's question. That's kind of cool. Nathan. It's not Nathan, it's Nathan. That's really neat. It sounds like Nathan. It sounds like someone with an accent saying Nathan, which is kind of neat. It says this may be irrelevant, but can you explain what's the point of the isolation level? Why isn't everything serializable? Serializable means that only one process can touch the data that you're working with. That is a recipe for concurrency problems. If each person who was doing an insert, update, or delete against a table locked the rows that they were working with for the entire duration of their transaction and no one else could even read them, it would make reporting queries a catastrophe, because you want to be able to run read queries even at the same time people are doing inserts, updates, and deletes. For example, I may want to get the total number of orders that have hit today, and I don't really care if people are in the midst of adding orders as we speak. I just want to see the ones that have committed so far. Different isolation levels are key to making that work. Serializable is the kind of thing that works really well when you're on your desktop developing your own application in isolation, but as soon as you get multiple users, you're kind of screwed. All right, we will stop there for the day. Tomorrow, I'm not sure yet. Tomorrow, I don't know if I'm going to do a Dead by Daylight stream tomorrow. I just got a brand new gaming PC. I just got one from Skytech Gaming, who I'm a big fan of. Skytech Gaming's also on Twitch, too. Skytech Gaming Official over on Twitch. And got an NVIDIA RTX 4090. Woohoo! All kinds of horsepower in there. Things about $4,000 altogether. But I'm not going to probably have it ready for streaming by tomorrow morning. So for tomorrow, what we'll probably do is another round of office hours questions. So I will see y'all tomorrow on office hours. Adios, y'all.